Hi, I'm Carl Kopp, and welcome to Motivation and Gamification. And what I want to do in this lesson is talk about the different ways in which people become motivated through gamification. And some of the methods are methods that you as an instructional designer may be familiar with, and some of the methods may be brand new or something that you haven't considered before. So let's take a look at how motivation impacts gamification. So the first model that I want to look at, the first motivational framework that we'll discuss is John Keller's ARCS model of motivation. So if you're an instructional designer and had, instructional design class, you're probably familiar with the ARCS model of motivation. And basically what it does is it talks about what motivates learners. And Keller came up with several things. One, and how we get somebody's attention is one of them, right? We gain a learner's attention, and that's how we can eventually motivate them. If we can't have the attention of the learner, how are we going to motivate them? The other is relevance. Something needs to be relevant to the learner in order for them to care about what's happening. And of course, confidence. We need the learner to understand that they can indeed at some point learn this information. It's not so difficult that they won't be able to learn it. And then finally, satisfaction. You have to have some level of satisfaction as a result of learning this information. And so all of these elements go into driving motivation according to Keller's model. So let's dig in just a little deeper. So before we do that too far, I just wanted to show one of my favorite motivational games was Pitfall. Great game by Activision. And it was really kind of interesting because if you think about it, all you're doing is running sideways, jumping big black holes, dropping down sometimes to avoid scorpions and jumping over log. Like, what really motivates somebody to go through a game like this, right? It seems kind of basic, and why would somebody want to do that? But yet I was highly motivated to go through the Pitfall game. So let's explore that a little bit more, and lots of games. So one is attention. So think about for a moment what keeps your attention during a game. So I'll give you a moment to think about that. And closely examined, think about, when you first play a card game, what's your motivation there? Why are you involved? Why are you paying attention? Or you first play a video game or a game like Candy Crush, right? What keeps your attention during the game? Well, according to according to Keller in his ARCS model, there are several things that can keep our attention. So one of those things is variability, right? That's change. We as humans are very attuned to things that change around us, paying attention to changes. So we want to be very careful in implementing change to gain somebody's attention. If you're talking, it could be a change of tone. If you're moving, a change of movement, a change of media. If you're in a game, maybe the change in environment or introduction of a new character, those kind of things, moving from one level to the next. Variability is a great way to grab somebody's attention. Another way is concreteness, something that's tangible. So if you hold up an example of a sign or show a before and after image, those are concrete visual images that grab our attention. If it's in a writing, it might be an anecdote, it might be a biography, because this is a real person. It's something that really happened. So that's concrete, something that we can definitely anchor our knowledge around. And then, of course, there's conflict and adversary, right? Or maybe competition might be better, conflict or competition. But when you're playing a game, there's a different level of intensity and attention that you're paying because you have an opponent than when you're in practice mode, right? There's always that sense of, I've got to be at my best because I'm competing with somebody, or there's some kind of conflict, a challenge that faces the learner or the player. So games themselves can offer a challenge. So conflict is a way to think about that as well. And then, of course, you've got humor, always a good way to grab attention when it works. Humor, you have to be careful. Something that you think is really funny and you say it and people just look at you like crickets, that's not going to grab attention. Or if your humor is, off the mark, if it's kind of offensive, if it's lewd, even in the perception of the learner, not even your own perception, but perception is reality, then you gain the attention all right, but the wrong kind of attention, right? Negative attention, defensive attention, people not paying attention to you. So humor's okay. Self-deprecating humor works best, but be careful if you're going to use humor to gain attention. Discovery, that kind of goes to variability, but we like to find out new things like, oh, what's over there? What's in this box? Unboxing videos on YouTube are all about discovery. So that's a really good way to grab attention. And then, of course, participation. Hey, come on, everybody, let's go do this. Let's go pay attention. Let's go grab this. So participation is a great way to grab attention as well. It's an activity that gets people involved, and we know that active learners have a better chance of learning and retaining information, and getting people to participate in an activity kind of fosters that. So those are ways that we can grab attention. 6 ways to grab attention: variability, concreteness, conflict, humor, discovery, participation. So let's put some of those to work. So there's something called on medius res, or in medius res, which means in the middle of, or in the midst of. So this is when you start in the middle of something, and then you kind of catch up as the instruction goes on. So it's a great way to grab people's attention because, they don't quite know what's going on. A lot of times a murder mystery will start this way. Forrest Gump, when he's sitting on that bench, just breaks into a story kind of in the middle of his life, and then you're like, oh well, what really kind of happened? And then you see all the adventures of Forrest. If you've ever watched the movie Baby Driver, the first scene in that movie where there's almost no words spoken, and Baby's just kind of pulls up the car, and then it gets into this big car chase, and you're like, what is going on? Like, why? How come nobody? So that's kind of this technique in the middle of it. And I've got a video that talks about this as well. And then you can add levels or excitement as you go through your gamified experience as well. So here's one. This is 3 different levels. So level 1, you're talking to the receptionist, so you kind of jump in the middle of this call. Or level 2, you jump in the middle of a call with a nurse who's a gatekeeper, right? This is a typical branching scenario. The 3rd level is you're talking to a physician, right? So you can jump in. So in a traditional instruction, maybe you would start with, okay, first you meet the receptionist, then the nurse, and then the physician. You go through these 3 levels. But this could also be a manner of just kind of introducing somebody in this way that they don't understand what's going on, and they have to kind of catch up to the situation. So all of these are ways to grab attention. Maybe there's a conflict. You're trying to sell something and they're trying not to buy it, which happens a lot in the sales situation. And so you have this sense of conflict or the sense of competition. That can be a way of introducing content as well in a gamified environment. Most games have challenges that gain the learner's attention. So when you think of developing gamification, a lot of times people automatically think of points, badges, and leaderboards, but really you should think about attention, relevance, satisfaction, behavior change, story, virtuous loop, reward and feedback structures, right? All of those are, I say, deeper elements than points, badges, or leaderboards. And challenge is an important element. Actually, research shows that when people overcome challenges, it gives them confidence to try harder and more difficult challenges. So challenge is a good way to introduce attention gaining, right? Right away, I've got a challenge. I've got to figure out what to do. So that's an important method to think about. So when you're designing a gamified experience, think about how you're going to gain and maintain the attention of the learner. And this is something that's very important. Maintain. A lot of times people develop a gamified experience or even just a regular instructional experience, and they forget that you have to maintain the attention. You can't just have the attention once and assume that, oh yeah, okay, I got their attention. I'm in good shape. I don't have to worry about it for the next hour and a half. Wrong, 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 because your learner's attention is going to wax and wane. And when it wanes, you've got to find a way to get it back. So maintaining attention is really important. You've got to keep introducing questions or humor or mystery or variability or something to keep the learner engaged at certain elements. In fact, Jesse Shell talks about something called the curve of interest, where you gain interest, and then something happens, right? You satisfy that interest, and then all of a sudden it goes down. You can't have it go down, 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 down. So you have to do something else to gain that interest. And think about the curve of interest of your gamified learning. How interested are people? When will it wane? When do you need to add something to gain the attention? Those types of things are really important as you're developing your gamified instruction. So the second element in the ARCS model is relevance, right? When does a game or a learning event seem relevant to the learner? And we know from a lot of literature and a lot of theory that relevance is an important part of adult learning. Adults learn when they realize they don't know something, when something's relevant to what they want to do. So those kind of things we need to think about as we examine the concept of relevance. So here are some ways to think about relevance. Experience. Show the person who's learning in the gamified environment how the new learning is related to their previous experiences, their life experience, what they might experience in the future. Relate it to experiences they've had, experiences they will have. This is a good way to show relevance. Hey, you're learning this because this learning experience is going to translate into better sales. It's going to translate into better learning. It's going to translate into better relationships. Whatever this experience is, it's going to help you in different areas. And the second items here are related to that, right? Present worth. Here's why you need to learn this now. Here's the importance of learning this today. It's going to make you a better person. It's going to help you, not much different from experience. And then future is, hey, you're going to need this for the future. That is a taller order for adult learners. Like, hey, you may need this in the future, so think about this. People don't want to learn just in case they might need this for the future. They often want to learn just in time. Like, oh, you're going to need this in the next 5 minutes. Oh, okay, boy, this is really relevant. Or, hey, I struggled with this. Show me how to do it. That's really relevant, right? So relevance is really important. So for example, I want to build a stone walkway, for example. Never thought about it before, but a long time ago in a class, we learned all about building stone walkways, and I never paid attention. Like, who cared back then? I didn't care. I wasn't building a stone walkway. But now that I'm thinking about building one, it's highly relevant. So relevant does change, and giving people access to information helps when they can choose the information they want, makes it very relevant. Oh, today I want to learn about, building stone steps. Okay, this is relevant to me. I'm going to seek out that knowledge. I'm going to find it. So in a gamified environment, oftentimes you won't know 100% the relevance. Sometimes you will, but maybe having learners seek out or unlocking information that they need to do something that might be relevant is a very important attribute you can add to your gamified experience for the learners. So other items are modeling, show how the actions in the game model real life actions. This is what you really need to do. So this image here of folks in an ice cream store who are getting ice cream, you're playing the game, and you are the gentleman here who is giving ice cream out. That might be very relevant if you're starting a job next week on serving up ice cream, right? So very relevant. It's modeling what the behavior happens to be. And then choice. Choice is really important. We're going to see this in other models that we talk about from a learning perspective, but learners and game players want to have choice. If they feel that they don't have choice, if they feel that it's being handed down on high to them without them having any say, people are going to be a lot less motivated. So you want to give options, give choices. I always give the example of when my sons were younger, I would always give them a choice of when they can go to bed, right? You can go to bed at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. It's totally up to you, right? And so they always pick 9 o'clock, but I gave them that choice, gave them a sense of the choice was relevant to them. They could have some control over what they needed to do. So Again, we have attention, and attention sometimes seems to be fleeting, so we want to build on that attention, grab their attention, and we want to make it relevant to the person, explain to them why this information they're learning is very relevant to now or to in the future, or to their lives in some way. And again, you want to think about specific relevance activities or content you can add to keep your training motivational for the learner, right? What elements of relevance are you adding? A lot of times, what I see in the design of instruction is somebody will create instruction, which is great instruction, and they will say, oh, you need to do this, 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 and this, and this, and they'll never talk about why, right? The relevance is the why. This is why you need to be in compliance. This is why this information is critical to our corporate success. This is why being able to recite our policy will keep you ethical, right? All of those things are important. So relevance a lot of times is, why are we doing this? And that's something that you want to think about as you design the instruction. So the next one is confidence. I love this image from an old Atari game or old video game. It might not be Atari, but it was translated. I think it went over to Japan and translated, instead of "you are a winner" or "you won," it says "a winner is you," which I just think is so a great motivational, great confidence type of item. But confidence is what is your feeling of trust in yourself, your feeling in your abilities to accomplish a goal, whether it's a small goal or whether it's a large goal, right? The ability of you to know what you're doing and to do it with conviction. And in gameplay, now, fortunately, in gameplay, we can and gamification, we can fail a little bit in our own, if it's a single player game in our own kind of world, be okay with that failure, not have a big deal with that failure. But in multiplayer games, and that failure actually builds confidence, right? Because you fail and you try again, and then you're successful, and you're like, I know what to do. In a multiplayer game or with other people, we tend not to want to fail. We tend to want to do failure by ourselves, right? And kind of do that. But there are ways that we can, when we design our instruction, help people be more confident. And we want to think about that as we approach it from a gamified perspective. So remember, success helps people feel confident. So smaller wins, smaller successes early on in the gamified instruction will help people then reach the next level. One way to do that is through something called scaffolding, and I like the old Donkey Kong, right? But it's the process of controlling a task that might be initially beyond the learner's capabilities or the employee's capabilities, and you slowly help them learn how to do something, and then you give them a little bit more information and a little bit more information, and slowly they move up until they can do that particular activity. A lot of times that's if you think of grades, like, oh, you're going to learn all the math you need in first grade so that when you get to second grade and do other math, you already know how to do that. Oh, we're going to do addition and subtraction so that you can understand multiplication and division, right? So we start small and simple and move our way up. We can do that with guided practice, which is step-by-step instructions, and then taking away the knowledge. So that's kind of a step called fading, right? I'm going to help you, I'm going to help you, I'm going to help you, and then I'm going to step back. I'm going to let you do that. I do that in one of my classes called Managing E-Learning Projects. I coach through several iterations, several drafts of the document, but then in the final version, I kind of step back and say, now you need to write that final version, right? And that's a scaffolding type technique. Another technique is to have different entry points into the gamified experience or to learning. Video games do this really well when you can play a game at the novice level, intermediate level, or expert level, right? You allow people different entry points into the learning module. And if somebody says, I'm going to try at expert level and they fail, you still have the intermediate level that they can hopefully learn from and then go up to the expert level. So that is an important element as well, helping learners go up through the scaffolding process. Now you need to have a careful understanding of the content that needs to be taught, the behaviors that you're trying to influence, all that kind of stuff is important, but it can be done by making sure that you have multiple entry points. And it doesn't just have to be three. Three, a lot of times they think three is a magic number. It doesn't have to be a magic number. You could have 5 entries into the instruction. You could have 6 entries in the instruction. Design it how you want. You could also, another way to do that is have multiple levels of help. So for example, you might have help that says, here's a vague clue that you kind of still have to interpret. Or the second level of help is, here's a more specific clue. Or the third level is, here's the answer, right? So you could have different help embedded as scaffolding as well into your gamified instruction. So we also want games to have a level of, and gamification have a level of risk taking, right? Good video games lower the consequences of failure. And there's lots of research that says we actually learn from failure, and sometimes we even learn from watching other people fail, which I think is kind of interesting. There's a study on cardiologists that does that. But basically, players can start where they left off, and failure is a good thing. So think of your gamified instruction. Allow failure, encourage failure, but I would say encourage intelligent failure. So what does that mean, intelligent failure? I don't understand what does that mean, Dr. Cup, intelligent failure? What I mean by the concept of intelligent failure is simply this. Look for potential real world areas of failure. Where would a teller fail in their conversation with the client? Where would an insurance agent fail in their assessment of a claim? Where would a salesperson fail in making the sale? And add those points in there. And then when the learner inevitably makes a failure point, doesn't make the sale or doesn't do the right insurance adjustment or whatever, that becomes a learning opportunity. Remember we said adult learners learn best when they know they don't know something. So if we can help them fail intelligently, then that failure and the remediation of that failure happens in training. And then when that person goes out on the job, they're not making that failure. They've already learned not to do the thing that caused the failure. So gamification and games allow you to do a little bit of risk taking. Like, let me try that. Let me see if this works in a safe environment. But then also, I got it wrong. Why did I get? How come that's not right? And then you go into the explanation, and you're fixing it. You're remediating it. It's an opportunity for learning. And when lesson learned, then they take that lesson out into the actual job situation. So think about allowing risk taking as part of your design, right? As part of creating that design. So next we have confidence. So we have this thing called confidence, right? So how do we, encourage confidence, right? One is to let learners know what they're going to be learning and let them know that they can actually learn it. Like it's not beyond their level of comprehension. I always like to give this example. A guy named Roger Barrister was the first person ever to break the 4-minute mile, which, was pretty impressive because at that point, people actually thought breaking the 4-minute mile was physiologically impossible, meaning they didn't think people could actually break the 4-minute mile, but this guy did. But the more impressive thing, I think, is the following year, something like 28, 29 other people broke the 4-minute mile. Because they were thinking, yeah, if that Roger guy can do it, I can do it, right? I've raced him before and won or almost beat him or did beat him. He's not that great of a runner. I can do that, right? I have the confidence because they know it's possible. That's what testimonials are about, right? Those are what, when you have somebody come back to speak to your class or to your company and said, hey, I became a millionaire and you can too, right? Building that confidence. So inform the learners of the goals, the objectives, and the requirements of what they're going to be doing and that it is possible. Now, it still can be scarce, right? Hey, 3 people have beat this game in all of history. Only 3 people have beat it. Yeah, but I can be the 4th, right? That helps. Difficulty also, if we sequence easy to hard. Now, we need to be a little bit careful because with adult learners, if we make things too easy, they'll get very, very bored and they will check out. So we don't want it to be super simple and so easy that they can do it in their sleep. No. We want some level of difficulty. And if we don't know the right level of difficulty, that's where, hey, intermediate 1, intermediate 2, or kind of hard, kind of not hard, that's where we can play with the levels of entry into the gamified experience as, basic, intermediate, or expert. Or we can offer different levels of help, basic help, intermediate help, expert help, right? So you can decide how you want to leverage that difficulty to build confidence. Expectations. Let people know what's in store for them so they have realistic expectations. It's going to take you about 20 minutes to finish this, or this is going to be the level of difficulty, or this is how many people have been successful at this, or this is how many times people tend to ask for help, right? We set the right expectations so people know what to do, so people can handle that kind of information. So make sure that you think about what expectations you're conveying to the learner. And then attribution. Help players attribute their success to the amount of effort that they spend, right? So success is a byproduct of effort. It's not all luck. It's not all chance. Yes, in any kind of gamified environment, there might be a little bit of luck. There might be a little bit of chance. But if you make success totally contingent upon chance and luck in a learning environment, then you'll be lucky somebody actually learned, right? We don't want to be lucky that people learn. We want it to be designed into the process so that they've learned. So you want to make sure that you reinforce to the learner that the reason why you're here at this high level of achievement is because you've learned this, this, and this. We're reminding the learner that they're learning in the gamified process, right? It's not just a game, you're learning. It's not just an experience, you're learning. Otherwise, don't do gamification in an organization, right? So the other thing about confidence and relevance, just like attention, it needs to be conveyed throughout. So you can't set confidence level once, you can't set an attribution once, you can't set expectations once. You need to constantly be reminding the learner of these things that they need to do. That's really important for you to think about as you design the instruction. Also, think about, what are some specific confidence building activities you can add to your training to keep the learner motivated throughout, right? Maybe they answer some questions. In fact, I was doing some work with an organization that creates online courses. And one of the feedbacks that they gave me and many others is that learners actually like to be questioned in the courses. And in fact, they like difficult questions to ensure that it's testing their knowledge. So if you can create, instruction, gamified instruction, and then you create a difficult question that if somebody learned something, they would actually get this information, that's actually a good thing. The learners want to be challenged. They want to know that the knowledge that they're learning is being applied. They want to know they're actually learning through the process. So throughout your gamified instruction, add some difficult questions that only somebody paying attention to could really get and really understand. That can become very important as somebody is working through your instruction, and you want to keep them motivated. Have them answer these difficult questions so that it can propel this again. Yeah, I got it, man. Look at this. I know this. I got it. I'm moving forward. So make sure that you do that. It's going to be very helpful for you as you build the instruction. And then satisfaction. When do you feel satisfied with a game or a learning event, right? When are you like, yeah, this satisfies a need that I have. This helps me realize a dream that I always wanted, or helps me do better on my job, or makes my job easier, right? There's actually some research by Tracy Sitzman. She did this, way back, if you can imagine, back in 2011 when they barely had electricity. But she did this really interesting review of studies called a meta-analysis. And she looked at simulation/games. And she found that they built more confidence for on-the-job application of learned knowledge than did classroom instruction. In fact, 20% higher confidence levels. Why? Because the game simulation was more hands-on. It was kind of like when I went back to this test, right? This test, right? Hard questions help you think about, yeah, I got it. And hard games or simulations that make you mimic the actual on-the-job behavior gives you confidence if you can do it successfully. So think about embedding as realistic experiences in the gamified instruction that you're creating as possible. When people get that right, they'll feel this sense of confidence and they'll take it to the job with them. Now, again, a game simulation, gamified environment isn't going to replace actually doing it on the job, but it'll help people do it more efficiently and effectively and shorten that on-the-job learning curve because they've done all the pre-work, all the prep, all the thought processes. So that becomes really important for helping making the instruction, as we said, satisfying. Yeah, all that I've learned, I've actually done in this game environment. I've served the ice cream correctly. Yeah, bring on some real customers. I want to try it out. Now, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to help you be a little bit more confident, a little bit more knowledgeable than if you just read about it or you just watch a video about it, right? You've tried it at some level and you've gained confidence in doing it at that level. So that becomes really important. When we look at satisfaction, we want to think of things like positive outcomes, right? So we get satisfaction by winning, right? So set it up so that a person can win. You know, if you always lose, you become discouraged and actually become demotivated. So you don't want the learners to become demotivated. So you want positive outcomes. Try it again, or hey, I know you can do this. Those kind of positive outcomes are important. Constructive feedback, praise, attribution, all of this. And you're saying, well, Dr. Cup, some of this stuff seems like overlap, right? Satisfaction sometimes overlaps with confidence. Maybe that overlaps with relevance. Yeah, I would say, yeah, it does. That's okay. That's okay. You know, we as academics like to break things into nice little pieces, and we have one piece over here and one piece over there, and never the twain shall meet. But in reality, in real life, these pieces mesh and intertwine and overlap all over the place. And that's okay. If we think about them separately, it helps us design the instruction as effectively as possible. And the real winning is the gestalt of all of it together, giving this outcome is really what you want. So that's an important thing to think about. Also think about realistic settings, right? If it's more realistic, for an adult learner, it tends to be more satisfying, right? Although we're going to see some research later on, some theory later on that says, well, you know, maybe not. Maybe fantasy is actually a good thing for motivation. So again, none of this, it's still all in the research phases. We're still trying to figure a lot of this out. Humans are probably the most variable subjects you'll ever have for research. So some humans respond one way, some humans respond another way. So we're talking here about realistic setting. We'll talk about later on how fantastical settings sometimes can break down defenses and sometimes be more motivational. So again, know your audience. Basic instructional design tenet will be very helpful. As we talked about, overcoming obstacles, gain confidence and satisfaction. Yeah, I did that. Yeah, that's pretty cool, right? That's overcoming an obstacle. So that's really important as well. So again, when you design your instruction, think about what are some specific satisfaction activities you can embed into the gamified instruction. And I'm not talking about gamified instruction, but all kinds of instruction, right? You can add these little gamified elements in quote unquote regular instruction that help lead to satisfaction and relevance and confidence and attention gaining. So all of these things can be put in to help it become a better learning experience, a more satisfying and motivational learning experience. And ideally, your learners will be intrinsically motivated as well as extrinsically motivated. So intrinsically motivation is you want to do it for yourself, for your own growth, for your own learning, for your own satisfaction, as we're here. Extrinsic means external pressure is being put on you. Hey, do this to earn a badge or do this to earn a point or something like that. There's some research to suggest that both of them need to work together in order for the ultimate form of motivation. Of course, we want people to be intrinsically motivated all the time, but let's face it, some jobs it's really hard to be intrinsically motivated. Even a job that I love, some days I'm like, I'm not internally motivated to do this, right? I don't want to record this course, or I don't want to, log on at 6 p.m. in the evening, right? So even though I love what I'm doing and I love interacting with the students, there are days that, hey, maybe I'm not quite as motivated as I would like to be. That happens to everybody. So having that little bit of external motivation kind of pushes you toward that direction. Yeah, I don't want to, so for me, like, hey, maybe I don't feel like teaching tonight, but I have a paycheck that relies on me teaching, and that's extrinsic motivation, right? That's monetary points. If I want to earn those monetary points, I gotta teach this class. So yeah, here we go, right? So that combination of the both is probably the best, because no matter how internally motivated you are, there will be days that you will not be as motivated as you would like, and sometimes that extrinsic motivation pushes you over the edge. It doesn't necessarily work in the opposite direction, right? Or you're totally extrinsically motivated, because you're earning money, and then you take away the money, you will take away the motivation. So again, you want to have both. So let's review Keller's ARCS model of motivation, right? So we've got attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction, all, according to Keller, lead to motivated learner. And if we look at a chart, we can see we've got attention, which is variability, concreteness, conflict, humor, inquiry, participation, relevance, which is experience, present worth, modeling, etc. I'm going to read all of this, but these are basically a summary of the model. So when you design your gamified learning experience, or an experience with some gamified elements, think about how you're going to incorporate one or more of these continually throughout your instruction. And that will help you create effective, engaging instruction from the John Keller's ARCS model perspective. Now, as I said before, John Keller does not have has not cornered the motivational market. There are some other ways to think about motivation. So one of these is a gentleman named Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi discovered this sense of flow, right? Being in a flow state, which is highly motivational. Basic flow is when you're so involved in an activity, you lose all track of time. And it's at the optimal level of anxiety and boredom. And I always like to give this particular option, or not option, but example. Now, flow here, we've got our superhero person flying in a straight line, but it typically doesn't work like that. Flow kind of goes like this. Like, you start to learn something that might seem really difficult, and you're starting to get it, and all of a sudden you're like, okay, now I'm bored, I got this. And so as an instructor, you got to introduce content to make it hard again. Oh no, it's getting so hard, I might get some anxiety. Oh no, oh, now I got it. Okay, I got it. Now it's becoming easier. Oh, it's too easy. Okay, now, so look at that. We have to keep introducing difficulty so that we can have this kind of back and forth between anxiety and boredom. Otherwise, we could just get all anxious or all bored. So that's really something to think about as we go through this process, right? We want to really have our items be vacillating between boredom and anxiety, and we need to do that well. So in a classroom, we can kind of sometimes look at learners' faces and make adjustments, body language, make adjustments. Online, we have a lot harder job. And so that's where, if it's self-paced, adding different levels of help can be helpful. Pilot testing, where you know where learners might run into difficulty, can be helpful. In an online class that's live through Zoom, you might want to have a lot of questions. You might want to add quiz questions. You want to add test questions so that people can stop and test their own knowledge to see if they're getting it, to stay in the flow state. Now, to be honest, in a lot of educational environments, flow state is kind of the holy grail. You're probably not going to put learners 100% into the flow state. That's really kind of a difficult thing to do. But having some kind of elements around that can be important. So what does build flow, right? How can you add some elements that might get people a little bit closer to that state? Well, first of all, they have to feel like it's an achievable task. They have to feel like, hey, I could actually do this. Right? This isn't impossible. This isn't something that is going to be too hard. I think I can do this. The second is you want to give somebody a sense of an opportunity to concentrate. Flow typically doesn't happen without a person concentrating on the activity at hand. So maybe encourage them to be in a quiet space, encourage them to be all in, just take a half an hour a day on this task or whatever it happens to be. So alongside concentration and achievable tasks, we have clear goals. Like, what exactly do I need to do? A vague or a goal that's ambiguous is not going to help at all with putting somebody in a state of flow. If you don't know what to do, it's hard to get into a rhythm, right? It's hard to get into the state of flow. You have to know exactly what to do. Feedback can help. Say, hey, you need to try this, you need to try that, you need to try this. That can help reinforce movement toward those goals. And then, of course, you want what's seemingly effortless involvement. So this is where you're completely riding that up and down curve that we saw before in the middle of flow. That's where you're maybe introducing a little bit of difficulty and then backing off, and then it becomes easier and easier. Then you add another level of difficulty, but not so hard that it stumbles, or you want it to be frictionless. If somebody needs help, they can get help. If somebody needs to move forward, they can move forward, right? You want it to be as effortless as possible. You want to have control over, the learner needs to have control over their own actions, like making their own decisions. This goes back, very much like building on some of the ARC stuff. And in flow, your concern for yourself disappears, right? You're only involved in the process. And let me give you an example of that. You lose track even of food, right? So when my wife was, when my oldest son was going off to college, my wife decided she wanted to build a scrapbook for him. But actually, the scrapbook wasn't for him, it was for her. But she wanted to create a scrapbook. So literally one Saturday morning, she sat down at 8 o'clock in the morning and worked all day on the scrapbook, lost all track of time. Her goal was clear. She wanted to create a scrapbook for her son, going from kindergarten all the way through senior in high school. It was an achievable task. People had done scrapbooks before. She had seen scrapbooks, so that was no problem. It was a quiet Saturday. The kids were out doing something so she could concentrate. She got feedback. She looked at it and said, yeah, that looks like a great scrapbooking page, or no, I need to change this. I need to do that. She had the tools so she could cut what she wanted. She had stickers so she got this. She didn't have to stop and drive to the store to get supplies for the scrapbook. She had them all there. So it was effortless to get what she needed. She made the decisions about what went on what page. There were some guidelines, right? Hey, this is the graduation party page, or this is the, first day at school page. And, so she had some guidelines, but overall it was, she had control. She lost all concern for herself in that she did not stop to eat the entire time. She just kind of, no lunch, no breakfast, no dinner. She was so absorbed in the activity. She lost all sense of time. In fact, she was working on it all day, and literally like about 10 o'clock at night, she says, hey, when are we having dinner? And I'm like, dinner? It's 10 o'clock at night. You've been, no, it's not. I just sat down. It can't be 10 o'clock at night. I just sat down, because she had lost all sense of time. Then I calmed her down and said, oh, okay, what do you want for dinner? She had dinner, and then she kind of got out of this flow state and goes, oh, I can't believe it's 11 o'clock already. How come you didn't tell? And I'm like, all right, I'm going to bed. I can't win this. But basically, that's an example of being in a sense of flow. Another good example that you may have gotten into, maybe you don't do a scrapbook, but is playing a sport, right? Or playing a video game, right? You sit down and, you start the game and an hour goes by and you're like, the game's over already. Literally, the referee just blew their whistle. Or I just play the video game. It can't be 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Those are things that build flow. So think about your instruction. Does it match some of these things? Is there an achievable task? Are there clear goals? Are you giving the right feedback? Do you have all the resources the learner needs at their fingertips? Does the learner feel that they're making decisions, right? All those things can be helpful for building flow. So you want to have that. Now, we talked about this briefly before, but I want to talk about it a little bit more: intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic, internal motivation, extrinsic, external motivation. Oftentimes people think about money for external motivation, right? But they're basically independent constructs. And so what do I mean by that? Well, early on in motivational research, the researchers postulated, and the lens through which they looked at motivation was a person was either internally intrinsically motivated or externally extrinsic motivated. You couldn't be both, right? They were dependent, right? The more intrinsically motivated you were, the less extrinsically motivated, and vice versa. But it turns out that's not true. Somebody can be both internally and externally motivated at the same time. And think about this all the time. Like, you go to graduate school, you might want to go to graduate school because you enjoy learning, you want to find out more about your field, but also at the end, you might get a raise or you might become more employable. Those are both external motivations. So it's very possible to be internally and externally motivated. So, for example, when I was younger, I made money cutting the grass for people. And I can tell you, I was very externally motivated by the money for the mowing. Yes. But I also had a sense of satisfaction of looking at the lawn when I was done and going, wow, it's neat. It was scraggly before. I made it neat and clean. I have nice, neat rows. And you get a sense of satisfaction, right? You can see your progress. You can get compliments. Hey, the grass looks great. All that kind of stuff. So I was internally and externally motivated to mow the grass. So that kind of motivation coexists. So as we create instruction, we want to think about coexisting internal and external, not exclusively one or the other. So external motivations encourage people to continue an activity, especially when they're not internally motivated, right? And this kind of motivation is least likely to work when the rewards are superfluous, or basically they're meaningless, right? They don't engage the learner. It's not informative about your ability. It's not giving you information on how well you're learning. It's just like stuff. Oh, you logged in 5 times in a row. Congratulations. That's not really that's just not really that motivating, right? Oh yeah, I logged in. So what? Any idiot could log in. This isn't really, I don't care, but did I learn anything because I logged in? Did I advance my life in any way, my career in any way? That kind of stuff. So what is external motivation? Well, badges are, points are, awards, leaderboards. They're all examples of extrinsic motivators. And this is why points, badges, and leaderboards tend to get a bad rap. Because if you are only arbitrarily creating these things and say, yeah, if you answer these questions, you'll get 10 points. Well, why 10 points? Some questions are harder than the other. Why aren't some worth 20 points? Why aren't some worth 5 points? It's just 10-point a question. That'll motivate them. No, it won't. It's meaningless motivation. People are pretty smart and they'll see through that type of superfluous or shallow gamification. So you really want the people, the learners, the employees to be vested at a deeper level than just badges, points, and leaderboards. Now, so for example, use points to tell somebody how correct they are, right? You could score 0 or 5, 5 being excellent, 0 being horrible. And if you score a 3, you're like, I'm somewhere in the middle. That's interesting. Wonder what I could do to do better, right? But if it's just, I don't know why I got 5 points as opposed to 4 points, then it's not going to be helpful. So you want to think about that as you create the instruction. So I always like to throw this in progress. There's a website called Progress War, and basically you press a button and you watch as the bar progresses, and it has no intrinsic value, and after a while it becomes frustrating, right? It's not a motivational activity. This is created to motivate, to show some of the dangers of gamification and how meaningless it can be if it's not tied to something of meaning, i.e. intrinsic motivation. So for gamification to work, it needs to be tied to something internal, something the learner or the employee actually wants to achieve. So let me give an example. LinkedIn, when it early on in the early days of LinkedIn, they wanted everybody to fill out their profile because that was really important, filling out your profile. And when LinkedIn added a progress bar, they got a 20% increase in profile completions because people are like, I'm 80%, I'm almost done. I'm going to do this. Rather than go, I don't know how much I have to fill out or how much is there or whatever. No, all of a sudden, hey, I only have 20%. I'm going to finish it, right? Or I only have 10% or 5%, or, oh, wow, I'm 50%. I better get moving, right? So it's not that progress bars like this are bad. It's not that it's not effective, because it's obviously effective. The difference is one has meaning behind it and one does not. So you need to add gamification both intrinsically and extrinsically. Have meaning behind what the learners are doing, and they'll be more motivated. Don't have meaning, and they will become less or demotivated. So another example is games like Super Mario Brothers. Coins are collected and players are rewarded for a large number of coins, right? That's kind of extrinsic motivation, but it keeps you coming back because you do want to get those coins because they will help you with lives and with the scoreboard. So the coins are worth something to the player of that game. Now, the interesting thing about gamification is they're worth nothing to somebody outside of the game, and they have no worth outside of the game. But in the gamified space, those coins have meaning. And that adds to the motivation of playing the game. And as I said before, use points and rewards and those types of things to provide feedback on performance. Update on progress, level of correctness. Remember 0 to 5 or 0 to 10 or whatever. Oh, points means you're able to trade those in for, okay, that's good. Rewards means you have special powers. Oh, okay, right? So have the reward structure, points, badges, leaderboards, tied to some kind of meaning within that gamified environment. Intrinsic motivation, the opposite. We've been talking about this for a while, but the opposite of extrinsic is intrinsic. These are elements that keep a person interested, a player interested for a long time, because they tap into our underlying motivation as a human, right? One motivation is to stay alive, if you want to go to an extreme level. Another motivation is to be socially accepted by others, right? To be accepted by others, right? That's an intrinsic motivation. One is to be recognized. That's an intrinsic motivation. And it's not just games, right? There's all kinds of awards, right? Some of the most, famous people in the world still have award ceremonies, right? You still have the Emmys and you still have the Oscars, and you're like, hey, don't you have enough money? Don't you have enough recognition? You need an award? Yeah, because people are motivated by rewards at almost every level. So even small rewards are highly motivational. So for example, if you take your car to a car wash and you have a little card that you get stamped every time you go to the car wash, when you get to the 6th car wash or 10th car wash or whatever, you get a free car wash. That's a reward, right? That's and something like, oh, I'm kind of excited. I did this, right? Now that's externally driven, but there's a sense of accomplishment internally that you've got a free car wash, right? So again, these two mix together very, they're very much entangled in spite of what some early research says. And if you look at a game like The Sims, it taps into intrinsic motivation, right? Most people want to have a career and they want to be successful in their career. And so that's kind of the premise of this game, successful career. And if you look at rewards, this is interesting. When you get a reward for a high performance, it strengthens our perception of freedom of action. Like, hey, I'm going to go after that award, or I think I can earn that award, or I think I'm a little bit better. So that reward, that external element, sparks in me and in others desire to internally be better. And I think in some cases that the reward is just a proxy for wanting to do better. Like someone will say, hey, what's one of your goals? Well, I want to run a marathon because I want to be recognized for running a marathon. But think of the sacrifice and the effort it takes to run a marathon. So it helps you get into shape if you run a marathon. It helps you to lose weight if you want to run a marathon. It helps you live longer, according to some people. You know, if you do running and cardiovascular, it helps you to think better. So all of those intrinsic motivations are embodied in wanting to win an award for running a marathon. So there's very much, I think, this proxy where a seemingly extrinsic reward leads to internal motivation. And at another level, of a level that I don't know that much about, but look at billionaires, right? Bezos and Branson, and who race to be the first people, non-astronauts, in space, right? Like they've got all the awards and money and whatever that they would want, but they're still motivated to be the best, to be the first, right? And it doesn't really matter what it is, it's recognition. And so, and they're internally driven for that recognition. So again, I think the intrinsic extrinsic dichotomy is really kind of interesting in terms of how people are motivated. So another way to look at motivation, so we've looked at intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. We looked at the Joseph Keller's model of arcs. And now let's look at something called self-determination theory, which is sometimes it's called a meta theory because it looked at a lot of the researchers looked at a lot of underlying studies and basically found that people are motivated by 3 different things. And none of this should come as any surprise if you stayed with me this long in the presentation, right? Because self-determination theory, sometimes called SDT, basically says humans are motivated in all kinds of activities by one, autonomy, our ability to feel in control of our destiny, making our own decisions, not being controlled by somebody else, deciding what we want to do on our own. That's all autonomy, right? Competence, meaning I feel I can gain competence by doing this. I feel I have the ability to do this. So autonomy, making your own decisions, competence, yeah, I can do this. And relatedness, which is social interaction, social recognition, social praise, right? All 3 of these things go into motivating us. Self-determination theory means that we can make our own decisions, autonomy, we feel that we can accomplish the goal, and we have this social relatedness. I always think of relatedness as peer pressure. Yes, your parents were right. We are susceptible to peer pressure. And it turns out that can motivate us in pretty dramatic ways. So let's look at some of these as they relate to some games. So hopefully some of you going way back will remember Farmville, a big craze at one point on Facebook. And James Paul Gee, a researcher at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, who I believe has since retired, talked about players as producers and not just consumers. So the interesting thing is a lot of gamified environments is we as the players actually have control over the environment. We can control what it looks like in Minecraft. We can build our own environment. In Second Life, we can create our own experiences. We can decide what we look like. When we play a game, when we decorate our avatar, all of that goes into us having making our own decisions about what we want to do in the game. And so Farmville is an interesting example because basically the game was you would grow some food and you would harvest the food, and then you would try to harvest as many crops as you wanted to. And it turns out some people started actually with their own autonomy planting words, planting messages with certain types of vegetables, right? So they would have a white crop, or a green crop, and then they would plant corn and they would water the corn and everything so it grew faster, and then the corn was yellow and they'd have a message in the yellow corn. So that's where, as a player of a game or a gamified experience, you're actually kind of writing. You want to give the learner freedom to kind of self-express within the game, and the sense of co-designing in the game. So you want to give learners and players room to move when they experiment within the game. It becomes really important to get them motivated to play. Now, the other competence talks about, James Paul Gee talks about the idea of pleasantly frustrating. And this is the idea of flow that we talked about a little bit, or confidence that we talked about, right? Good games stay within, but at the outer edge of what the players are able to do, right? The challenges, they feel challenging, but they're also doable. I can accomplish this. That's a sense of competence, right? I can do this. I have the ability to do this, and I'll stay motivated. I'll keep trying. Maybe I'm failing, but I'll keep trying because I think I can do this. And if I just try a little bit harder, I'm pretty sure I can do this, right? That's that idea of confidence and the idea of competence, right? Clark Aldridge talks about short sims building confidence and competence. The ability to do something and the confidence that you can indeed do it. Those are important things from a gamified perspective and from a learning perspective as you design instruction. And then the one thing I like about games a lot is that they are performance before competence. And one of the things often in learning is we try to teach you every little single thing we think you'll need to know, and then we give you the hard problems. Then we give you the difficult information, right? We build up to it. And there's some research and some things that I talked about earlier about, yeah, we want to start simple and we want to move up, right? That makes sense. And it does make sense, but there's also some other perspectives about education that says, well, why don't we just throw the person in? That's the in medias res that I talked about earlier, right? But good video games do something interesting. They basically throw you into having to perform whether you know how to perform or not. And then you fail, but you've learned from that failure, and you try again and you fail, but you've learned a little bit more, and then you try again and you fail, but you learn through failure, right? Players can get into a game and start doing things before they're competent. Oftentimes, the game supports that by retries and hints and tips, and try it on easy mode first, or turn off the the bad actors so that they don't get in your way as you're just learning the environment, and then you can turn them on as you get better and better and better. So when you think about developing instruction from a motivational perspective, maybe it's a good idea to throw the learner into performing the task that you want them to learn how to perform before you actually tell them every little thing they need to know. And again, I go back to Malcolm Knowles, who always said, adult learners learn best when they know they don't know something, when they know they don't know something. So maybe it makes sense for us as designers of instruction to point out to the learners what they don't know. And then they get it as they go through our instruction, right? Because they're more apt to learn it because they realize, ooh, I don't know this. I need some help learning it. So I think that's really kind of interesting and not a bad way to design instruction, especially gamified instruction. And then relatedness is when a person feels connected to others, right? It can be in real time or other ways. This is a really fascinating tool here. This is from the game You Don't Know Jack, which has got to be one of my all-time favorite games. It's just a trivia game, definitely uses a sense of humor. But the interesting thing that it does in the background, because when you're on a leaderboard, that's you're connected to other people, right? You feel like you know other people because they're involved in playing as well. Because you can see the artifacts that they left. They might not be playing with you at the moment, but you can see the artifact like a leaderboard. And so I can see the leaderboard in this. So I know, oh yeah. Oh, my friend, Heather played. Okay, that's cool. I did better than Heather. That's great. In this game, not always. Heather usually does better than I do, but you can see that. But the version of this, which I think is uber clever, is that when I play the game, all my actions and answers and time is recorded, and then I don't have to play head to head with Heather at the same time. Heather, when she logs into play against me, it takes my recording of my performance and makes it seem to her as if it's in real time, that we're really playing the game together when we're not, right? Which I think is really clever. It really gives us a sense of relatedness and connectedness, even though we're not playing in real time together. I played before, and my recorded version is now playing her, and we're seeing each other on the leaderboard. I mean, it's just really kind of a fascinating thing. But in terms of self-determination theory, the idea is that we are motivated by what others expect and think of us. Like it or not, many of us are motivated through that. And self-determination theory taps into that. So you have the idea of competence, related socialness, competence, I can do it, and finally, I can make my own decisions. Now, here's yet another theory of intrinsic motivation. And this is got by a guy named Maloney, which is fascinating because he looks at motivation slightly different than anybody else that we've looked at before. And he believes that motivation can be driven by challenge. So, okay, that makes sense. That is what we did before, but fantasy and curiosity. And he says these will drive people in a gamified, no, he doesn't say this. We've applied this to gamification, but I believe these can drive people in a gamified environment. I don't want to put words in his mouth. So look at fantasy. And it says there are both cognitive and emotional reasons why you would want fantasy. So fantasy can help a learner apply old knowledge to understand new things, right? So you already know how to manage, but let's see about managing in space, right? So let's see what the differences are. And the other interesting thing is, a lot of times I've had learners say, oh, I'm already a good salesperson. I don't need the sales training. I already know what to do. So I don't want to participate because I'm already good. But if you say, hey, I want you to sell oxygen to somebody on Mars, then what happens is, and you say, well, that seems kind of silly, but what happens is person's preconceived notions disappear. They don't go, oh, I already know how to do that. They go, I wonder if I could do that. I wonder what it's like. I wonder if I could apply this, right? So it leaves the baggage behind. Somebody doesn't say, oh, I would never do that, or oh, this isn't relevant to me, or it doesn't make sense, or whatever. It's like, oh, okay, here's an experience. I'm going to try to apply my knowledge to this experience. There's actually some research that says that children remember fantasy words better than actual words because it takes more cognitive effort to learn a fantasy word because there's no precedent for it. You have to, you have to work really hard to figure out what does that word mean, right? You can't divine the meaning of the word. You have to figure it out. You have to go through some mental cognitive gymnastics. So fantasy is interesting. So for cognitively, it builds maybe more neural pathways. Maybe because it's not familiar to us, we put more effort into it. Maybe we try to figure out how fantasy relates to reality. So we kind of try to work those together, causing more cognitive thought processes. And then emotionally, it allows us to check our baggage, our doubt at the door, and just kind of be more open-minded. So fantasy works in those ways. So it's not a bad thing to interject. And it doesn't have to be like fantasy, selling oxygen to somebody on Earth, but it could say, hey, imagine selling to somebody in another country. Or imagine selling a service when you usually sell a product, right? What are the similarities? What are the differences? Like tackle that. Like these what if scenarios can be really helpful. So one of the things that Melanie talked about was fantasy. Another thing discusses curiosity. And game environments and gamification can invoke a learner's curiosity by providing informational complexity, like, hey, what's going on? Hey, what's in this environment? Hey, what's going to come next? Unpredictability is a way to guide curiosity. The learner doesn't know what's going to happen next. The learner is unsure of the situation, right? So those are things that can definitely pique someone's curiosity. Surprise, feedback in that area can help. So think about, can I build curiosity? And if you go to Bartle's players types, you can see how these kind of map onto motivation, right? So this might map onto the player type of explorer, right? Relatedness from self-determination theory might map on to the idea of a socializer. In self-determination theory, we have the ability of competence, the feeling of competence. That might map on to achiever, right? So all of this is related. All this information is tied to one another as you think about designing motivational, gamified experiences. So if we think of instructional design principles for intrinsic motivation, and we look at some of the Maloney and we look at the other stuff, we can think of challenge. We've already talked about that. Curiosity, we just talked about that. Control, or the ability, autonomy, ability to make decisions. Fantasy could be used in there. Cooperation, people working together, because that's the social relatedness. I don't want to let you down, so I'm going to work really hard so that I don't let you down. That's the sense of cooperation. Competition, on the other hand, or conflict that we talked about, is, hey, I want to do better than you. I want to see how good I can be, right? I'm going to compete. And then recognition, right? So all of these things, as you start to think about designing gamified instruction, does your gamified instruction have a challenge? Does it evoke a sense of curiosity? Does it give the learner a sense of control? Is there a little bit of fantasy in there that might make it cognitively challenging or help people leave some of their baggage at the front door? Is there a sense of cooperation where people could work together? Is there also, coopetition? Some people say cooperation and competition, coopetition. Is that in there? And then finally, recognition. Can I allow people to be recognized for what they're doing? All of those can help motivate somebody through a gamified learning experience. And look at something like The Sims, right? It combines autonomy, which is control. You have complete control over your character, where, even when they go to the restroom or get something to eat. There's competence, that I can have my character live through the day. There's a social aspect to it. There's cooperation. There's completion of tasks. There's recognition as you move up in status. There's fantasy. It's real life, but nobody has a house like that, or nobody has a pool in their living room, right? So all these kind of things work together to help drive and motivate the learner. There's a book called Loyalty 3.0, which is by the original founder of Bunchball. And he talks about autonomy, meaning I control something. So look at it from the gamified learner's perspective. Is there a sense of control, mastery? I improve. Purpose? I make a difference. Progress? I grow. I achieve. Social interaction? I connect with others, right? All of those I statements are highly motivational and tapped into everything from Keller to self-determination theory, everything that we're talking about. So think about, is there a way you can tie all this together as you start thinking about designing instruction? So in summary, check out the ARCS model. I think that's really important. The idea of attention, relevance, confidence comes in handy. We talked ad nauseum almost about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. The two are tied together. Self-determination theory, 3 simple things to remember, right? You want to make sure that people are related to one, feel a sense of relatedness, social connection, that they feel that they can confidently and competently achieve the goals. And then finally, they have control decision over that. Maloney's theory of intrinsic and motivating instruction brings in the idea of fantasy and curiosity, which does draw humans. I mean, some of the most read books are Harry Potter books, and they're all about fantasy. The Marvel superheroes, all about fantasy. And then we talked about the instructional design principles for intrinsic motivation. So there you have it, looking at motivation as it applies to gamification. So best of luck to you as you apply these concepts to your design of gamified experiences. And remember to play, learn, and have fun.